They fined me $500 for planting milkweed, said it looked unkempt and deteriorated the neighborhood aesthetic. That was June 15th, 2024. By August, the fines had escalated to $15,000, and Diane Patterson, HOA president, was threatening to foreclose on the house my husband and I had paid off 30 years ago. What she didn't know was that every ugly plant she documented in her violation notices was protected by Colorado state conservation law. And what she really didn't know was that I'd been recording every threat, every forged document, every conversation with the developer who'd promised her a $75,000 finder's fee if she could force me out. By Sunday morning, when the mayor stood in my garden surrounded by cameras and environmental officials, Diane Patterson's carefully constructed world was about to collapse in the most spectacular way possible. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 68 years old. For 43 years, I taught botany at Colorado State University, specializing in native plant ecosystems and pollinator conservation. My husband David died 2 years ago from pancreatic cancer. We'd lived at 247 Meadowbrook Lane since 1994, raised our daughter here, planted our first garden together in soil that David personally amended over 3 summers. This house, this garden, it's where every good memory of my marriage lives. After David died, I threw myself into the garden. Grief has a way of demanding physical work, something to exhaust you enough that sleep becomes possible. I'd wake at 5 a.m., make coffee in the kitchen where David used to read his newspaper, and spend the next 6 hours in the yard. By May 2024, I'd transformed our conventional lawn into a native plant demonstration garden. Purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, milkweed for the monarchs, native grasses that David would have loved, every plant chosen for ecological purpose, every placement researched and documented. The first violation notice arrived on June 16, 2024. I remember the date because it was our wedding anniversary. 45 years if David had lived. I'd spent the morning at his grave, telling him about the painted lady butterflies that had discovered the yarrow patch. When I got home, there was an envelope taped to my front door. Violation notice. Property at 247 Meadowbrook Lane, cited for unkempt landscaping that deteriorates neighborhood standards and property values. Fine, $500. Compliance required within 14 days. I read it 3 times, standing in my driveway, confused. My garden was immaculate. Every bed mulched and edged, every plant healthy and thriving. I documented everything in my botanical journal. Plant species, installation dates, growth patterns, pollinator activity. This wasn't unkempt. This was a carefully managed native ecosystem. That evening, I called Diane Patterson. She'd been HOA president for 2 years, ever since the Johnsons moved to Arizona, and the board needed someone willing to handle the paperwork. Diane was 52, real estate agent, always dressed like she was showing million-dollar properties, even when checking mailboxes. Her house 3 streets over looked like a hotel lobby, all beige and cream with sculpted shrubs that probably cost more to maintain than my annual property tax. Margaret. Hi, she answered, her voice carrying that professionally friendly tone that real estate agents perfect. I assume you're calling about the violation notice. Diane, I don't understand. My garden is well maintained. Everything is healthy and properly cared for. The issue isn't maintenance, Margaret. It's aesthetics. Your plants don't match the neighborhood character. We have standards about landscaping that maintain property values. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What specific plants are the problem? The weedy-looking ones along your front border. The tall grasses. Those purple flowers that attract all the bees. Several neighbors have complained that your yard looks neglected compared to their manicured lawns. Those are native species, Diane. Purple coneflowers and little bluestem grass. They're indigenous to Colorado and provide crucial habitat for pollinators. That may be, but they violate Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants regarding landscape aesthetics. I'm sorry, Margaret, but the fine stands. You have 14 days to replace them with appropriate plantings or face additional penalties. What would be considered appropriate? Traditional landscaping, turf grass, perhaps some knockout roses, boxwood hedges, clean lines, uniform appearance. I can recommend my landscaper if you'd like. He does excellent work. After I hung up, I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. Section 7.3 stated, "Homeowners shall maintain landscaping in good condition that enhances neighborhood aesthetics and property values." Nothing specific about plant types, nothing prohibiting native species. The language was deliberately vague, which meant it was subject to interpretation by the board. I decided to document everything. Old habit from 43 years in academia. When someone challenges your work, you respond with data. I spent the next week photographing every plant, recording every species, documenting the health and maintenance of my garden. I compiled research articles about native plant benefits, water conservation statistics, pollinator decline data. By June 23rd, I had a 40-page report proving that my garden was environmentally superior to conventional landscaping. I submitted it to the HOA board along with a formal appeal of the violation. 3 single-spaced pages explaining why native landscaping should be encouraged, not penalized. I cited Colorado water conservation guidelines, state pollinator protection initiatives, even EPA recommendations for sustainable residential landscaping. The response came on June 30th. Appeal denied. Original fine of $500 remains in effect. Additional fine of $500 added for failure to comply within the 14-day deadline. Total amount due, $1,000. Payment required by July 14th. That's when I knew something else was happening. This wasn't about aesthetics or neighborhood standards. Nobody responds to a detailed scientific report with a form letter, and doubled fines, unless they have an agenda beyond what they're stating. I started paying attention to other things, like the black BMW that appeared in Diane's driveway 3 times a week, like the man in the expensive suit who met her at the clubhouse every Tuesday afternoon, like the way she'd started attending every single HOA board meeting when she used to miss half of them. On July 5th, I received the 3rd violation notice. $1,500 fine for continued noncompliance. Property must be brought into conformance with HOA standards by July 19th, or face lien proceedings against the property. Lien proceedings. They were threatening to put a lien on my house over milkweed and coneflowers. I called my attorney, Barbara Williams, who'd handled our estate planning when David died. She'd been our friend for 20 years, attended our anniversary parties, knew this house meant everything to me. "Got it. HOAs have broad authority to enforce covenants," she said after reviewing my documents. "But this seems extreme. $500 for landscaping violations is unusual, unless there's actual damage or hazardous conditions." "There's no damage, Barbara. My garden is healthier than most yards in this neighborhood. Something else is going on. Let me do some research. In the meantime, don't pay these fines yet. Payment could be construed as admission that violations exist." July passed in a blur of additional violation notices. By August 1st, the total fines had reached $8,500. Each notice contained the same vague language about neighborhood aesthetics and property values, but never specific, citations of which covenant provisions I was violating. That's when I started recording everything. Barbara had advised me that Colorado is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations as long as I was participating in them. I bought a digital recorder, same model I'd used for field research, and started documenting every interaction with the HOA. The breakthrough came on August 10th, during what Diane called an informal mediation meeting. At the clubhouse, she'd invited me to discuss options for resolving the violation issues. I arrived with my recorder in my purse, red light blinking. "Margaret, thank you for coming," Diane said, gesturing to a chair across from her in the small conference room. She had a folder open in front of her, documents I couldn't quite see. "I want to help you resolve this situation before it escalates further." I want that too, Diane. But I need to understand what specific violations you're citing. The covenant language is vague, and my landscaping exceeds industry standards for maintenance and health. She smiled that real estate agent smile. The issue is compatibility with neighborhood character. Your native plants, while perhaps well-intentioned, create visual discord with the established aesthetic. Which is what exactly? Sterile lawns and non-native ornamentals that require excessive water and chemical inputs. Her smile tightened. Margaret, I'm trying to help you. The board has been very patient, but we have other homeowners to consider. Several neighbors have expressed concerns that your property is affecting their home values. Which neighbors? I can't disclose that information. But the complaints are legitimate, and the board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect property values for all residents. How are native plants affecting property values? Do you have appraisal data supporting that claim? Diane closed her folder and her expression shifted. The friendly real estate agent disappeared, replaced by something harder. Margaret, let me be direct. This situation can end two ways. You can comply with the HOA requirements and restore conventional landscaping, or you can continue fighting and face foreclosure proceedings. We're currently at $8,500 in fines. By the end of this month, it'll be $15,000. Eventually, we'll file a lien and force sale of the property. You'd really do that? Force me out of the house I've owned for 30 years over coneflowers? I'd prefer not to, which is why I have an alternative solution. She pulled a business card from her folder. Patterson Realty has a client interested in properties in this neighborhood. They're paying above market value for the right homes. I could facilitate a sale that would net you a substantial profit and resolve all these legal issues. There it was. The real agenda. You want me to sell my house? I want to present you with options. Your home is worth approximately $650,000 in current market conditions. My client is prepared to offer $675,000, cash sale, 30-day closing. You'd walk away with enough to buy a nice condo in a community without landscaping restrictions. And you'd get a commission on that sale. I'd receive standard real estate compensation, yes, but that's not my primary motivation. I'm trying to help you avoid foreclosure, Margaret. I kept my voice steady, even though rage was burning in my chest. Who's your client, Diane? I can't disclose that until you indicate interest in selling. But they're a reputable developer with several projects in Colorado. They're looking to acquire properties in established neighborhoods for redevelopment. Redevelopment. They wanted to buy my house, tear it down, and build something more profitable. And Diane was using HOA violations to pressure me into selling. I'm not interested, I said. This is my home. My husband and I built our life here. Her expression went cold. Then the fines will continue. And when they reach $15,000, we'll file for foreclosure. You'll lose the house anyway, but without any financial compensation. Think carefully about which outcome you prefer. I left that meeting with 43 minutes of recorded conversation, including Diane's explicit threat to force foreclosure, unless I sold to her mystery client. That night, I listened to the recording 3 times, transcribing every word. Then I started researching. Colorado HOA law is complex, but certain things are clear. HOAs must follow their own governing documents, provide due process for violations, and act in good faith to serve the community interest. Using HOA authority to force property sales for personal profit is a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum, potentially criminal fraud at worst. I needed to know who Diane's developer client was and what they were really planning. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office and started searching public records. Property transactions, business registrations, development permits. By afternoon, I'd found it. Ridgemont Development Corporation had filed preliminary plans for a mixed-use residential project covering 4 properties on Meadowbrook Lane, including mine. The plans showed my house demolished, replaced by a 4-unit townhome development. Market rate, $450 per unit. Total project value, $1.8 million. If Diane could acquire my property for $675,000, Ridgemont would make substantial profit. And according to the real estate commission schedules I found, Diane would earn approximately $40,500 on the sale, plus whatever finder's fee Ridgemont was paying for properties she delivered. I had my motive. Now I needed to prove the connection and expose the fraud before the fines reached $15,000, and they could legally proceed with foreclosure. August 15th brought another violation notice. $2,000 additional fine for continued non-compliance and expansion of prohibited plantings. Total fines, $2,500. The notice claimed I'd added additional unsightly vegetation to my garden, which was absurd. I hadn't planted anything new since June. But the accusation gave me an idea. If Diane was fabricating violations, she was probably documenting them with photographs. And if she was photographing my property without permission multiple times, she might be trespassing. I installed security cameras on August 16th, covering every angle of my yard. 4 wireless cameras with motion detection and cloud storage. Total cost, $340. Best investment I ever made. The cameras caught her 3 days later, August 19th, 6:47 a.m. Diane Patterson entered my front yard, walked through my garden beds, and took photographs of perfectly healthy plants from angles that made them appear overgrown or dead. She spent 11 minutes documenting violations, including pulling back healthy foliage to photograph bare soil underneath and positioning her camera to capture scattered mulch that she'd deliberately kicked around. Had video evidence of her fabricating violations, but I needed more. I needed to prove the connection between her HOA enforcement and the development deal. The opportunity came on August 23rd. I'd been watching Diane's patterns, noting when she met with the man in the expensive suit. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m. they met at the clubhouse. This Tuesday, I positioned myself in the small kitchen area adjacent to the conference room, making tea like any resident might, while my recorder captured their conversation through the thin walls. "Margaret Chen is still refusing to sell," Diane said. "The fines are at $2,500, but she's hired an attorney. This might get complicated. Can you accelerate the timeline?" The man's voice was smooth, corporate. "We need that property by September 30th to maintain our financing commitments." "I can increase the violation frequency, get the fines to $15,000 by early September, then file for lien and foreclosure. But if she fights it in court, this could drag out for months. What would expedite her departure? If I could make the situation uncomfortable enough, she might sell just to escape the harassment. But it has to look legitimate. HOA enforcement, not personal targeting. How much do you need to make this happen? The agreed finder's fee is $75,000 when the property closes. But if you want me to take additional risks, I'd need something up front. Say $15,000 now, the balance on closing." Papers rustled. "I can do $20,000 now, but Ridgemont expects that property delivered by October 1st, Diane. Whatever it takes." "Understood. I'll have her out by then." I stood frozen in the kitchen, tea forgotten, as they discussed my removal like I was a furniture arrangement problem. $20,000 up front, $75,000 total. Diane was being paid to force me out of my home using her HOA authority as a weapon. That night, I made copies of everything. The recordings, the security footage, the public record showing Ridgemont's development plans, the violation notices with their fabricated claims. One set went to Barbara Williams, another to my daughter Emily in California, a third to my brother in New York. If Diane tried to destroy evidence or intimidate me, multiple people had documentation of her fraud. August 28th brought the expected violation notice, $4,500 additional fine for willful, non-compliance and obstruction of HOA, enforcement, total fines, $15,000. The notice concluded, pursuant to HOA covenant, enforcement provisions, a lien will be filed against the property if total fines are not paid within 30 days. Barbara Williams called that evening. Margaret, we need to act fast. Once they file the lien, fighting it becomes much more complicated. But I think we have a different strategy. What kind of strategy? Your native plants. You said everything in your garden is indigenous to Colorado, right? Specifically chosen for ecological value? Every single species. I have documentation of provenance, habitat value, water conservation benefits. Colorado has a Native Plant Conservation Act that protects indigenous species from removal or destruction, especially on private property. If your garden qualifies as native plant habitat, the HOA may be legally prohibited from requiring its removal. Hope flickered for the first time in months. How do we prove that? We need official documentation from a state environmental agency. Someone who can certify that your property provides protected habitat. Do you have any contacts in that world? I smiled, thinking of 43 years in academia. Barbara, I have an entire department full of contacts. The next morning, I called Dr. Sarah Martinez at CSU's Department of Ecology. She'd been my graduate student 15 years ago, now a leading expert in pollinator conservation and native plant restoration. I explained the situation, sent her photographs, and species documentation for my garden. She called back within 3 hours. Margaret, this is incredible. You have 17 native plant species, including 3 that are considered keystone species for regional pollinators. The milkweed alone makes this property valuable monarch butterfly habitat. Have you documented butterfly activity? Daily logs since May, including 5 monarch breeding observations and 3 generations of documented chrysalis development. This could qualify as protected habitat under state conservation law. I need to see it in person. Can I come tomorrow? Sarah arrived on August 30th with 2 colleagues from the ecology department and equipment for habitat assessment. They spent 4 hours in my garden, photographing, measuring, identifying every species, documenting pollinator activity. By afternoon, Sarah was shaking her head in amazement. Margaret, you've created one of the best urban native plant demonstrations I've seen outside of official conservation projects. This garden provides documented habitat for 17 native plant species, including 2 that are state watch list species for habitat decline. You have 3 confirmed monarch breeding sites. The bee activity alone is remarkable. Can that protect the property from HOA enforcement? Potentially. If we can get this designated as a conservation demonstration site, it would be protected under state environmental law. HOA covenants can't supersede state environmental protection statutes. How do we get that designation? Sarah smiled. We make some calls to people who care about pollinator conservation, starting with the Mayor's Office Environmental Initiatives program. That evening, Sarah contacted the city's Office of Sustainability and Climate Action. By September 1st, I had a scheduled site visit from city environmental officials. By September 5th, Mayor Patricia Morrison herself had requested a tour of my garden for Sunday, September 8th, to evaluate it for the city's new native plant demonstration program. The mayor, visiting my garden. The same garden Diane Patterson had fined $15,000 for being ugly and unkempt. I sent Diane an email on September 6th. Dear Diane, as HOA president, I wanted to inform you that Mayor Morrison will be conducting an official city environmental assessment of my property on Sunday, September 8th at 10 a.m. Several city environmental officials and members of the press will be attending. You're welcome to join us. Her response came within 10 minutes. Margaret, what is this about? I didn't reply. Let her wonder. Let her panic. Let her spend the weekend trying to figure out how her careful scheme to force me out had suddenly involved the mayor and environmental officials. Sunday morning arrived clear and bright, perfect weather for a garden tour. I'd been up since 5 a.m., walking the paths David and I had created, touching the plants we'd chosen together. The monarch butterflies were active, dozens of them feeding on the purple coneflowers. A hummingbird visited the scarlet gilia. Native bees worked the aster blooms. My garden was alive in exactly the way David would have loved. Mayor Morrison arrived at 9:55 a.m., accompanied by 5 people. The city's Director of Environmental Initiatives, 2 ecologists from the State Conservation Office, a photographer from the local newspaper, and a videographer from the mayor's communications team. Sarah Martinez was already there, along with 2 colleagues from CSU. Diane Patterson pulled up at 10:02 a.m., clearly having received word about what was happening. She parked across the street and approached with forced confidence. "Mayor Morrison, what a surprise to see you here," Diane said, extending her hand. "Ms. Patterson," the mayor replied coolly, "I understand you're the HOA president who's been trying to have this garden destroyed." Diane's smile faltered. "Destroyed is a strong word. We've simply been enforcing neighborhood landscaping standards. By fining Dr. Chen $15,000 for planting native species that provide critical pollinator habitat. The fines are for violation of HOA covenants regarding aesthetic standards." Mayor Morrison looked around at the garden, at the butterflies and bees, at the healthy, diverse plantings. "Ms. Patterson, I'm standing in what may be the best example of urban native plant conservation I've seen in this city. Dr. Chen has created documented habitat for endangered pollinators using indigenous species that require minimal water and 0 chemical inputs, and your HOA has been attempting to force her to destroy it. We have standards to maintain property values," Diane said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "Property values?" The mayor gestured to the surrounding houses. "I've reviewed property records for this neighborhood. Values have increased 12% in the past 2 years. There's no data suggesting Dr. Chen's garden has negatively impacted anything except perhaps your personal preferences." Sarah Martinez stepped forward. "Mayor Morrison, if I may, we've completed a comprehensive habitat assessment of Dr. Chen's property. The findings are significant." She handed the mayor a bound report. 17 native plant species, including 2 watch list species experiencing regional habitat decline, 3 documented monarch butterfly breeding sites, pollinator activity exceeding anything we've measured in residential areas. This garden provides measurable ecological services, including stormwater management, carbon sequestration, and critical habitat for declining pollinator populations. "Dr. Martinez," Diane interrupted, "this is still a residential neighborhood with aesthetic standards, not a nature preserve." "Actually," said Mark Peterson from the State Conservation Office, "under Colorado's Native Plant Conservation Act, any property providing documented habitat for declining species is protected from forced removal or destruction. Dr. Chen's garden qualifies for that protection." Diane's face had gone pale. "Protected? By state law?" "That's correct. HOA covenants cannot supersede state environmental protection statutes. Any attempt to force removal of these plants would violate state conservation law." I watched Diane's expression cycle through panic, calculation, and desperate defiance. She was realizing her entire scheme was collapsing. "Furthermore," Mayor Morrison added, "the city is launching a native plant demonstration program to encourage sustainable landscaping practices. Dr. Chen's property is the ideal flagship site. We'll be providing official city designation and signage recognizing this garden's environmental value." The photographer was taking pictures, documenting everything. The videographer was recording the mayor standing in my garden, praising the very plants Diane had called ugly weeds. "This is irregular," Diane said weakly. "The HOA has authority to enforce neighborhood standards." "The HOA has authority to enforce reasonable standards that comply with state and federal law," Mayor Morrison corrected. "What you've been doing goes beyond enforcement. It looks more like harassment with an ulterior motive." Diane stiffened. "I don't know what you're implying." I'm not implying anything, Ms. Patterson. I'm stating facts. We've reviewed the violation notices you've issued to Dr. Chen. They cite vague aesthetic concerns without specific covenant violations. The fines escalated from $500 to $15,000 in less than 3 months, and we've received information that you may have financial interests that conflict with your HOA responsibilities. That's absurd. I've been acting in the community's best interests. Have you? I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me, because I have recordings that suggest otherwise. Diane's eyes widened. Recordings? I pulled out my phone and played the audio from August 23rd. Diane's voice filled the garden. Margaret Chen is still refusing to sell? I can increase the violation frequency, get the fines to $15,000 by early September, then file for lien and foreclosure. Then the developer's voice. How much do you need to make this happen? The agreed finder's fee is $75,000 when the property closes. But if you want me to take additional risks, I'd need something up front. Say $15,000 now, the balance on closing. The silence was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. That's... Diane started, but couldn't finish. That's you discussing payment for forcing me out of my home so you could collect a finder's fee from Ridgemont Development, I said. I also have video of you trespassing on my property to fabricate violations, public records showing the development plans for my house, and documentation proving you've been using HOA authority to benefit yourself financially. Mayor Morrison's expression had gone from serious to thunderous. Ms. Patterson, is this true? Have you been accepting payments from a developer to force homeowners out using fraudulent HOA violations? This is being taken out of context. There's more, I continued. I handed the mayor a folder, copies of violation notices with fabricated claims, security footage of Ms. Patterson staging photographs to create false evidence, documentation that she increased my fines specifically to force a lien filing that would benefit her buyer, and emails between her and Ridgemont Development discussing the timeline for my removal. The mayor opened the folder, her expression darkening as she read. Ms. Patterson, I think you need to speak with an attorney. This isn't just HOA misconduct. This appears to be fraud, extortion, and abuse of fiduciary duty. Mayor Morrison, I can explain. Save it for your lawyer. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office. Dr. Chen, I assume you'll be pursuing legal action? My attorney is already preparing several complaints, I confirmed. Civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of consumer protection statutes, plus a complaint to the state HOA regulatory board. Diane looked at me with something approaching hatred. You've destroyed me. No, I said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it. The newspaper photographer had captured everything. The videographer was still recording. By that evening, the story would be all over local news. HOA president caught accepting payments to force homeowner out using fraudulent violations. Dr. Chen, Mayor Morrison said, I apologize that you've had to endure this harassment. The city will be taking several actions in response. First, we're officially designating your property as a native plant demonstration site with protected status. Second, we're reviewing HOA regulations citywide to prevent this kind of abuse. And third, we'd like to hire you as a consultant to develop native landscaping guidelines for city properties. I'd be honored, Mayor. The consulting fee is $8,500. I believe that's the exact amount Ms. Patterson has fined you. I smiled for the first time in months. That's remarkably precise. After they left, after the reporters had their interviews, and the mayor had her press conference in my garden, after Sarah and her colleagues had completed their documentation, I stood alone among the plants David and I had loved. The monarch butterflies were still feeding. The bees were still working. The garden was still alive. My phone rang. Barbara Williams. Margaret, I just saw the news coverage. It's everywhere. Diane Patterson's name is being connected to fraud charges. Ridgemont Development is being investigated for bribery. And you're being called a hero for standing up to HOA abuse. I'm not a hero, Barbara. I just refuse to let them take my home. That's exactly what makes you a hero. By the way, 3 other homeowners in your neighborhood have contacted my office. Apparently, Diane issued violation notices to them too, all near properties Ridgemont wanted to acquire. You've opened up a much bigger case. The following Monday, Diane Patterson resigned as HOA president. By Wednesday, she'd been arrested on charges of fraud and accepting bribes. By Friday, Ridgemont Development had withdrawn all their acquisition plans for Meadowbrook Lane. The HOA board issued a formal apology and rescinded all my fines. They also amended the covenants to explicitly protect native plant landscaping and prohibited future enforcement actions that conflicted with state environmental laws. September 15th, exactly 3 months after that first violation notice, I stood in my garden with the official city designation sign being installed. Native Plant Demonstration Site, Dr. Margaret Chen Garden, City of Denver, Environmental Excellence Award. Mrs. Johnson from next door, who I'd suspected of complaining about my plants, appeared at the fence. Margaret, I owe you an apology. What for? I was one of the people who signed Diane's petition about your garden. She told us your plants were invasive species that would spread to our yards, and that you were letting your property deteriorate. I should have asked you directly instead of believing her. It's okay, Mrs. Johnson. No, it's not. Your garden is beautiful. I've been watching the butterflies. My grandchildren came to visit last week, and they were so excited to see the monarchs. Would you be willing to help me plant some native species in my yard? By October, 4 neighbors had converted portions of their yards to native plants. By November, the HOA had hired me to consult on converting the common areas to native landscaping. By December, the city had featured my garden in their official sustainability campaign. The mayor's office called on January 15th, 2025. Dr. Chen, we'd like to propose something. The city is developing a native plant ambassador program for schools. We need someone with your expertise to develop curriculum and train teachers. Would you be interested? What would that involve? Consulting work, approximately 20 hours per week, $75 per hour. You'd be helping develop the next generation's understanding of native ecosystems and conservation. $75 per hour, 20 hours a week. That was $1,500 weekly, $6,000 monthly. More than enough to fund the garden expansion I'd been planning and support the scholarship fund I wanted to create in David's memory. I accept. Today, I'm sitting in my garden surrounded by plants David and I chose together, watching monarch butterflies feed on milkweed that Diane Patterson once called ugly weeds. The garden has expanded to include a small greenhouse where I'm propagating native species for other homeowners. 18 properties in my neighborhood now feature native plant landscaping. The scholarship fund I created in David's name has already supported 2 graduate students in pollinator conservation research. The city's Native Plant Ambassador program has reached 1,400 students across 12 schools, and 3 other Colorado cities have contacted me about developing similar demonstration programs. Diane Patterson pleaded guilty to fraud and accepting bribes. She received 18 months in prison and was ordered to pay $127,000 in restitution to homeowners she'd harassed. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. Ridgemont Development paid a $340,000 settlement to resolve civil charges related to the bribery scheme. The HOA board is completely new, voted in by residents who were appalled by what had happened. The new president, Tom Wilson, stopped by last week with a proposal. Margaret, we'd like to rename the community common area. Call it the Chen Native Garden Commons, as an apology and recognition of what you've taught us. I thought about it for a moment, standing in the garden where David and I had built our life together. I appreciate that, Tom. But let's call it something else. The Resilience Commons. Because that's what native plants represent. They're resilient, adaptive, and they thrive even when conditions are challenging. He smiled. The Resilience Commons. I like that. Emily calls every Sunday now, video chatting from California so her kids can see the butterflies and hear about what's blooming. Mom, you're famous, she said last week. My colleague at work saw the article about your garden in National Geographic. They're doing a feature on urban conservation, and you're one of the examples. I'm not famous, honey. I'm just a woman who refused to let someone steal what your father and I built. That's what makes the story powerful. You didn't just save your garden. You changed how people think about landscaping and conservation and standing up to corruption. Maybe she's right, but sitting here in the morning sunlight, watching a painted lady butterfly land on David's favorite yarrow plant, I'm not thinking about being powerful or famous. I'm thinking about how the simplest act of resistance, refusing to destroy something beautiful, can ripple outward in ways you never expected. The plants David and I chose are still here. The garden we built together is thriving, and every butterfly that finds shelter here, every bee that discovers these flowers, every neighbor who asks about converting their lawn, that's David's legacy continuing. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's refusing to let bullies define what has value. It's trusting that beauty and truth will eventually be recognized, even if it takes time. It's knowing that what you've created matters more than what anyone thinks about it. Diane Patterson tried to destroy my garden because she saw dollar signs where I saw life. She lost everything because she forgot that some things can't be measured in money or property values or real estate commissions. And me, I'm exactly where I belong, in the garden my husband and I built together, surrounded by native plants that will outlive us both, teaching the next generation that resilience, patience, and standing for what's right will always matter more than conformity. The monarchs are migrating south now. In spring they'll return, their great-great-grandchildren seeking the milkweed I planted. The garden will bloom again, and I'll be here, tending what David and I created, proving every single day that ugly plants can change the world.